History abhors a paradox. Legacy of Kain. Time travel, changing fate in history. Revenge, redemption, and vampires.
I first came into this series from Soul Reaver and enjoyed it so much that I was super hyped for Soul Reaver 2 and went back looking for Blood Omen 1. I really enjoyed this game for its storytelling and absolutely loved its voice actors.
One of the biggest things about this game is the fact that they hired real voice actors. Simon Templeman as Kain, Tony Jay as Mortanius, and later returning as another character in the series. Paul Lukather as Vorador, Anna Gunn as Ariel, and Richard Doyle as Mobius. Many returning characters.
This is a series I've wanted to do a proper video on for a long time now, so let's get started from the beginning and start with Blood Omen. I can't find my physical copy, so I'm playing this on the digital version that I have on my PS3 for the most part.
Blood Omen Legacy of Kain is an action-adventure game developed by Silicon Knights, published by Activision and Crystal Dynamics. A pretty new thing at the time, storytelling in a video game, with actual voice actors and a tad adult? It's very Zelda-like, or kind of third-person style, over-the-top camera. Some puzzle-solving, platforming, and action.
I hate to say this, but after playing this game from beginning to end, it's not the best in the world. It's not terrible, but it's certainly flawed. It never crashed, or anything like that. But let's get into the specifics.
The game begins with a rather dark monologue and some violent imagery. At first, I'm sure you're wondering, what the hell is going on? Who are these people? Who the hell is that? For context, the killer is Vorador, a character that becomes more important in the series later and kind of in the game. The knight is Malik, a boss later in the game. The evil-looking wizard guy is Mortanius, another boss and your creator. And if you're really curious at all, the people being killed by Vorador, they don't matter. You start as Kain, a simple nobleman on a journey. Upon leaving the tavern, you are randomly attacked and killed. You can fight and kill a few of them, but there are quite a lot of them, and your attack is very slow. Kain wakes up in hell and angry. It's hard to read that on his face, but it's only through the monologue. He makes a deal for revenge. I love this line, the delivery really sells it.
They, victors, suffering to the conquered. Ironic that now I was the one suffering. Not anything as pedestrian as physical pain, rather the cruel jab of impotent anger. The hunger for revenge. I didn't care if I was in heaven or hell. All I wanted was to kill my assassins. Sometimes you get what you wish for. The necromancer Mortanius offered me a chance for vengeance, and like a fool, I jumped at his offer without considering the cost. Nothing is free, not even revenge.
And the real game begins. As you're attacking, eventually enemies will be stunned near death. This is when you can feed on them, or just kill them. What becomes difficult about this later is different enemies have different stats, and some you can feed on, others you can't, obviously. So normally a stunned and feeding state is led up with a huge blood spurt, but with other enemies, they do this, but they're not stunned. Some take more hits, obviously, but you may accidentally kill them, not meaning to, as has happened to me quite a few times. Thankfully, later on you get other spells, weapons, or armor that help with this, either instantly stunning them near death, or letting you feed on all enemies in the area. As I said before, the game is very Zelda-like, but you can change the camera only in two ways. You can either have it zoomed in or zoomed out to see more of the level. I prefer zoomed out, just so you can see so much more of what's around you. You start out simple, killing some enemies, feeding, picking up new items, scrolls to enhance your magic, vials that increase your health, and new side weapons or items like the Heart of Darkness here. You can use this to regain a good amount of health, and they act as extra lives when you die, by instantly reviving you but with a small amount of health. And this item, Flay, They're kind of like heat-seeking projectiles, so sometimes using these instead of magic on some enemies is very helpful. In this starting place, you'll get your first spell, Sanctuary. It brings you back here no matter where you are. It does give you back some health, but I rarely ever used it. After leaving your tomb, you'll come upon the men who killed you. They are very easily dispatched. Then the voice of Bortanius comes and tells you that they were merely the instrument of your death. Seek the pillars. Getting to the pillars, you get a cutscene of Ariel, the former balance guardian, who tells you that upon her murder, it drove her lover and fellow guardian Napraptor insane. And with him going insane, being a psychic and the other guardians being linked, it drove them all insane. And she tells you to seek them all out and kill them to restore the pillars. She also gives you a warning.
The reason Kain does this is because he wants to find a cure for his vampirism, even though Ariel tells him that there isn't one. So why does he do it? So your quest begins. Now let's start talking about the items.
As you go along, you'll get new abilities, like the bat form, the wolf form. The bat form works as fast travel to either specific locations and checkpoints like these towers. The wolf form makes you faster and able to jump over and in between platforms. A fog form that lets you walk on water and through barriers like bars, but you are not invincible. All these other forms use up your magic. And finally, the disguise form. This lets you blend as a human. You cannot fight, use spells, and you are slower. It does allow you to talk to some people, and eventually it gets upgraded so you can attack, and it gives you the form of a high-class nobleman. It also gives you access to a big story point. This also uses up your magic, obviously. Some of these forms are found in caves. In other caves, you'll find blood fountains that either improve your magic restoration, your strength. Mostly it just allows you to move rocks. I'm pretty sure it doesn't make you deal more damage or improve your dexterity for taking less damage. In other caves, you'll find new spells, maybe a weapon or some armor, or you'll get a new weapon after a boss fight. You'll also find items in the buildings of towns.
Now let's talk about the weapons.
Combat armor, the items and spells. You start with a simple sword. You attack pretty fast, but nothing too special. You'll get a mace. It works great for quickly stunning human enemies so you can feed on them. It does stun all enemies, but it's better to use this on humans to feed. Later enemies are much stronger, so this comes in handy. Then you get the axes. These are good for chopping down trees. They do great damage, but you can't cast spells or use items while you're using them. Up next is the flame sword. Works great against undead, keeping them dead. A good sword, but bursts everything into flames. And finally, the Soul Reaver. I don't like this weapon. Again, a two-handed weapon like the axes, and every time you swing it, it uses up a lot of magic. You do have to use it for a certain boss fight, but we'll talk about that later. And let's of course also mention the fact that the Soul Reaver has this horrible high-pitched scream every single time you swing it. My primary weapons were the mace and the flame sword near endgame. This is the biggest problem with this game. Every time you want to change your weapon or armor, you have to go into the inventory, which has to load, then load again when you leave. So, say you get to a spot with some trees, and then demons or humans you want to feed on. You can't feed on demons, undead, and there are enemies that can poison you too. You can't quickly change or swap weapons. This gets very annoying very quickly. At least with some spells, items, and forms, there is a quick menu. But the items and spells that you have hotkeyed are limited by 5. And your 5th spell or item you cannot change. It's always the last one that you just got, and it stays right in the middle. You can change the other 4 spells or items in the inventory, but you can only use one spell or item, not both.
Now combat. It's pretty simple really.
You can attack in all directions. Your hit range is pretty big, but some objects can get in your way. Thankfully, enemies are pretty stupid. Otherwise, combat feels very clunky, especially if there are more enemies on screen. Slow down. Thankfully, this can be used to your advantage. What can make it annoying is you get pushed back anytime you get hit, and God forbid there are traps or spikes around you. You can be bounced around and take so much damage and be near death. I had an enemy actually knock me back into a building. I wouldn't be too surprised if they can knock you back into another screen, too.
Now let's talk about the magic of Blood Omen. There are over 13 spells in this entire game, And during this playthrough, I actually missed 2, and in doing research, I found out that there was one that I never knew about.
Like I said earlier, the first spell you get is Sanctuary. That in this playthrough I only used a few times. It feels pretty useless. Next is Light, kind of useless too. It lightens up areas. I only used this a few times at a few pretty early dungeons. Then there's the Energy Bolt spell. A good range spell. It's good for activating buttons or switches that are on walls that you cannot reach. The Repel spell. This deflects other projectiles, 80 projectiles. I do believe that this does kind of actually act as a shield, but it's not really meant to be a shield. Just because there were so many times whenever I had the spell up and I was around a lot of melee enemies, they couldn't hurt me while I had the spell up. It does use up quite a bit of magic, but it's very handy. Next, Incapacitate. I never used it. It stops an enemy for a time. Inspire Hate. This is a spell that I missed. This causes all enemies on screen to fight each other till they die, or till the spell ends. The Stun spell. Use this on a human enemy and you can instantly feed on them. This is very helpful. Blood Gout. Another spell I never used. You use your own blood as a projectile weapon. Another reason I'd never want to use it. You have to damage yourself in order to use it. Control Mind is pretty much what it sounds like. There are some areas in some dungeons where you'd have to take control of an enemy to have them press a button that you cannot reach. They can die pretty easily, but I don't believe you take any damage if they get hurt or die. What is annoying is when you take control of an enemy using this spell, other nearby enemies will instantly attack whoever you are controlling. Spirit Rack is the same as Control Mind, only maybe much stronger. Spirit Death is an instant kill spell. I use this on quite a few demons. Blood Shower, another really good spell. All enemies on screen die and you feed on all of their blood. Good for when there are crowds of enemies around, and if you're low on health. And finally, Lightning. I never knew about this spell. Apparently it's hidden somewhere, and supposed to be very strong. You can only use it outside though. Near endgame, my setup was pretty much Energy Bolt, Repel, Blood Shower, Spirit Rack, and Stun.
Now let's talk about the armors.
You start out with Iron Armor, pretty standard. Bone Armor, when worn, the undead won't attack you, but I think you need to be wearing it when you first encounter them, because even if I switched to it, they would still attack me. Or maybe because I had attacked them first? Who knows, I rarely used it. Next is Flesh Armor. When wearing it, when you hit an enemy, you'll regain health. This sadly will also get you hurt if fighting enemies that have toxic blood. Again, another one I rarely used. Then the Chaos Armor. This is the best armor in the entire game, I think. When an enemy attacks you, they get damaged. It helps out a lot. I always continue to use this. Then the Wraith Armor. I never understood what or how this works. Apparently when you're wearing it, when you take damage, it divides it between your health and your mana.
So yeah, I rarely, if never, used it. Now let's talk about the items.
As I mentioned earlier with the first two that you pick up, Flay, the kind of heat-seeking projectile in the Heart of Darkness. As for the other items, there's an antitoxin that cures you of poison, very helpful later during the Dark Eden part of the game. An item known as Pentaligent Tarot. It kills enemies in a random way. I would only really use this if I had no other option for dealing with other types of enemies. Font of Putrescence. This is a semi-ranged item attack that will melt your enemies, but it will leave behind a puddle of goo that will harm you. There's also a slow time item. I don't think I really ever used it much at all. The energy bank, which fills up and I think gives you unlimited magic for a limited amount of time, but after it wears off, you have no magic. There is also Implode, another helpful weapon that explodes your enemies. Primarily, the best items are obviously whatever helps you kill stuff, and that heals. There are also Spirit Forges where you can give your blood for more of a certain item. It costs a lot, and it gives you 10 or more of that item. I only found 2, one for Flay and the Antitoxin. I do wonder if there was one for the Heart of Darkness or other items. You do get a lot of other or certain items like the Heart of Darkness, and thank God, because without the Heart of Darkness, this game would be much harder.
So I had mentioned already a few times how the load times of this game are its biggest issue. Well, here's another one. It's not really a big issue, but it is pretty annoying. Kain talks way too much.
So every time you attack, Kain either says his catchphrase here,
They Victus! They Victus! They Victus!
or he laughs. And he does it very often. You can be attacking air, and he does this.
They Victus!
I'm sorry, but you couldn't have had him say it less or give him more dialogue. There are these icons and levels where Kain says something about the area he's in, or it acts as a story point. You can replay them too by pressing the circle button. And with Kain talking so much, there will also be human prisoners that talk or make too much noise too. They are there for you to feed on for extra health. The men repeat the same lines and the women just cry. And if they're in the same area, you can hear them and it starts to overlap. The game loads every time you walk into a new screen. Save, walk into a new building, or walk out. They aren't long, but the amount of times you experience this, with changing a weapon, walking to a new area, having to change an item to heal, change a spell, walk into a building, it builds, and it gets so annoying.
Now let's talk about the story and the boss fights.
So after meeting Ariel, your first target is her former lover and guardian of the mind, Napraptor. Napraptor is probably the easiest to fight. Really, just about all the boss fights are pretty easy, not the levels so much. Button hunting, going through enemies or traps. You meet him along with Malik, the defender of the Nine. Napraptor shoos him away and welcomes you to fight him. He summons these orbs that go up and down this level, changing the level with spikes every time you attack him. Walk up to him and hit him a few times and he's dead. You collect his head, pretty cool and funny little item. Next, you go to Malik. By the way, when you first start out, you can be damaged by the rain and some sunlight, but you quickly get an upgrade that negates this. And you go to Malik's Bastion. There's no blood to feed on. I believe you do lose a bit of health if you do not feed for a while. There are enemies, but you can't feed on them. Again, the fight with Malik is pretty easy. For a fallen serf and warrior priest, he's really not that difficult to fight. But the combat in this game is not exactly complex. But you can't really beat him either. His spirit is fused to a magical set of armor, making him technically immortal. After you beat him, he casts this huge wave of magic that destroys everything, and you are forced to retreat and seek advice from the Oracle. Eventually, you make your way to these caves that lead to the mountains. You will find these dialogue spots that for some areas, like the Napraptor's Lair, Malik's Bastion, Avernus Cathedral, and every other place, act as landmarks for your bat form, or just fast travel to and skip some walking moments. But you may not want to do this, as you may miss a few items or upgrades that are also necessary to continue further. Also, in caves or in general, the Mace can break down these spike type rocks, and sometimes they have items underneath them. You meet the Oracle and get a cutscene where he tells you about Malik and Vorador's fight and tells you to seek out Vorador in the Termagant Forest. He also tells you about King Otmar and that he may be the only hope against the warlord only known as the Nemesis and his army. So you head off to the Termagant Forest and to Vorador's mansion. When I first got here in my original playthrough, I had missed a spell upgrade that I needed to progress, the Control Mind spell. I missed it by fast traveling here. And traveling through this forest is already a pain. It's filled with undead, projectile enemies, and swampland everywhere. But if you have the magic, you can get through it. Vorador's mansion is filled with other vampires. Hope he doesn't hold it against me for killing them. I mean, they did attack me first. Again, traps, hitting buttons in other rooms, across the room, and a cinematic meeting with Vorador. Through meeting him, he explains that it was him who defeated and caused Malik to be cursed, and that he murdered 6 previous guardians of the Pillars. Even though we only see him kill 4, as that was all there was there in the room. So in the cutscene, and this even continues throughout the game series, Vorador and everyone else claims that he killed 6 guardians, but in that cutscene, you only see him kill 4. That's something that's always kind of bothered me, but moving on. Vorador gives you a ring to summon him, and you're off again. Next, you make your way to a place called Dark Eden, a place being warped by magic. This is an area where you need the antitoxin. A lot of enemies here cause poisoning, and there's also lava everywhere. Sadly, your misform does not allow you to pass through the lava. What's especially annoying is this section where you have to activate these levers to drop or bring up ground so that you can cross the lava. Eventually you get to the tower and get inside. After running around doing puzzles and whatnot, you get to the boss fight. 3 guardians are here, but one flees and summons Malik. Then a cutscene plays, you summon Vorador and they fight while you go off to kill the other 2 remaining guardians. This fight is kinda difficult because one of the guardians creates water spots on the ground everywhere around you, and the other guardian is far away casting projectile spells at you. There is a lot of slowdown here with everything going on. Just use the flame sword on this doofus and then I throw projectiles at the other mage and you're done. When you exit, Malik is dead. I am curious as to how Vorador killed him. Shouldn't Malik have been kind of immortal or indestructible?
Also, and I need to point this out, why don't you fight Malik?
Really, it would make more sense if Royter gave you a weapon to fight and kill Malik, maybe the Soul Reaver, and it's best to use the Reaver to kill very magical beings. Anyway, moving on. Next, we're off to Avernus Cathedral. A lot of tough human soldiers and some demons. This place is a bit of a long maze to get through. When you finally get to the cathedral, more humans and some demons inside. Here, eventually, you'll get the Soul Reaver. The area where you get the Soul Reaver is pretty annoying, but it's pretty simple, just tedious. You go through several of these areas with this wind kind of pushing you around with some spikes and some enemies. Eventually, you get to the next Guardian.
So each Guardian represents their pillar, like an element.
Napraptor is the pillar of the mind. Malik, the pillar of conflict. Bane, the pillar of nature. Dejewel, guardian of energy. Azimuth, the guardian of dimension. Anacroth, the alchemist, guardian of the states. Mobius, the guardian of time. Ariel, the balance guardian. And finally, Mortanius, the guardian of death. After killing them, you are given something that represents their pillar that you offer to restore it. Anyway, you fight Azimuth. She tosses projectiles at you, summons demons, and teleports around. Another annoying fight that took me quite a while, but eventually I got her. Eventually, the strategy becomes use the reflect spell and you won't really get hurt much at all, along with the flame sword. Moving on, Kain finds himself going to Willendorf, a large kingdom, and its king, Otmar. His daughter has fallen into a horrible spell, and the king says if a cure is found, he'll give up his kingdom. But Kain doesn't want his throne, he wants his army to fight the Nemesis.
I have to ask, why?
You've barely fought any of the Nemesis troops. It's not like they're patrolling around nearby or anything. So why is Kain doing this? Because the game or the plot says that you have to? Kain has shown again and again that he doesn't care about anybody but himself. It's just so out of character. I'm sorry, but this whole thing just feels so forced. It would have been better if pretty early on you came across Nemesis troops, hordes of them. When you fight them, they are really tough. This would have given you great reason to think and seek out Otmar for his army to fight and rid them from the land. When you do talk to the Oracle, the first thing he talked about was the Nemesis and Otmar, as I talked about earlier. So yes, you know about them from this, but what is the threat? It would have been better if after the Oracle, the reoccurring enemies you fight are Nemesis troops, and they are tough, and there are so many of them. But no. Anyway, you go off on a quest to find the doll maker, the one responsible for what happened to Otmar's daughter. He took her soul and put it into a doll. Now, yes, during this quest, this is when you start fighting Nemesis troops, but this is the first time that you're facing them. You should have been fighting them much earlier. They are pretty tough, but you're more than equipped to fight them with your spells and whatnot. Eventually you get to the dollmaker's hut, you chase him down and away, and then you take his head. After that, you go back to Willendorf and give him the doll, and tell him you don't want his kingdom, you need his army. With a cutscene of the horde of the Nemesis army approaching and Otmar's small army as the last stand. As you can well imagine, the fight doesn't go well between Otmar's army and the Nemesis. You can find Otmar on the battlefield, until he dies. I should mention, earlier on at the Avernus Cathedral, you picked up a time streaming device, because as you escape the battlefield, the device activates and it sends you back in time. Kain discovers he's been sent back in time and decides to use this to kill the man that will become the Nemesis, who it's revealed to be a man known as William the Just, a once kind prince, later becoming a monster. You make your way to his castle. As you're looking for him, you walk in on Prince William speaking with Mobius, the time streamer, and the Oracle. Mobius brought Prince William weapons and information about an assassin. Then Mobius disappears. When you first time travel back to this area, you get a cinematic of Mobius speaking and rallying the people and wanting to go to the king. This fight is frustrating. His attacks do so much ridiculous damage, and again, the only way to fight him is with the Soul Reaver, and the Soul Reaver, for it to be effective, has to use up a crap ton of your magic, and it goes through it fast. And apparently nothing else will kill him. He will make sounds like he's being hurt. I've used the flame sword, I used the item's flay on him, but apparently he wouldn't die. You have to use the Soul Reaver. I did try to look up information on whether or not you have to use the Soul Reaver to fight and kill him, but I couldn't find anything. The best strategy is to swing and step away, but even that is not guaranteed. You will die a lot, as I did. Thankfully, I had a lot of hearts. He takes a lot of hits. Eventually he dies, guards come, and then the time streaming device activates again and sends you back to the present time. You find that you've changed time, but something foul is afoot. You smell the scent of vampire blood in the air with loud crowds cheering. As you make your way, you enter a cutscene where Mobius and his mob kill Vorador as the last vampire, but you are now the last. Thus, he turns the mob onto you. This is probably the easiest boss fight. You barely even fight Mobius. He just stands in the back and sends minions at you. You go through about 4 arenas to fight him. At first, some simple villagers, while Mobius hurls spells at you that just slow you down. They do a tiny bit of damage, but not much. It is of note that moving from one area to another, it has to load every single time. So next, Mobius summons Seraphim Knights at you. The whole time, if you just use the shield spell, chaos armor, and flame sword, you'll be just fine. The next fight, Mobius summons a warrior, and this fight is long and irritating. I was wondering if this fight was broken because I couldn't kill him. I used projectiles, other weapons, and such, and he was acting like he wasn't taking damage, but he wouldn't die. Then I discovered if you cast Spirit Rack on him, that kills him instantly. Then Mobius summons you. It's you from the future. Wink. Again, just use the shield spell and you won't get hurt at all. What does make the fight hard is your other version teleports around you. After killing yourself, Mobius comes down to face you himself. One hit and he's down. You do get a pretty cool cutscene though. After taking care of the time streamer, you receive a message from Mortanius, who's been kind of guiding you this entire time, telling you to come back to the pillars for the final battle. I should mention, after coming back to the present, because I was curious, you can't use your bat form anymore, except here to fly back to the pillars, but this just happens upon getting to the last screen. Upon your arrival, you get a cutscene of Anacroth and Mortanius arguing about you, and Mortanius easily kills the alchemist. A tad overkill, but okay, he's dead, dude. Jesus. After beating Mortanius, he suddenly takes on this second form. I originally thought that this was final boss second form, but actually it's the demon that's taken possession of him, known as the Unspoken, that started this whole thing by killing Ariel. He also explains that this was his master plan to destroy the world. Anyway, the Mortanius and then the Unspoken boss fights. Both are pretty easy, but the Mortanius fight is a bit of a joke. He just kind of stands in one spot, summoning skeletons. He teleports around a few times. He dies so easily, and yet the fight continues here, even though he's nowhere to be found. Green skeletons keep on coming up and exploding until you kill these random warrior skeletons? I don't know. Then finally the Unspoken starts. This one is a challenge. He disappears into the ground, then comes up near you. If he touches you, it does a shit ton of damage. Basically, move as much as you can, then hit the shit out of him. This took quite a few tries, but I got him. Then we get to pick our ending, a good or a bad one, along with a revelation. Kain is the last guardian, and he must decide to heal the world or damn it. So by choosing to kill yourself, you can heal and save the world, but as the last vampire, your race will be extinct. And if you pick to save the world, Ariel gives this monologue over these pretty trees. I rather hate that they made Kain sacrificing himself feel like nothing. He did your work, he did what you asked him to do blindly, and this is how he's rewarded? No wonder why he chose not to take his own life and rule the world and its damnation. Sequel bait!
All in all, Blood Omen is a perfectly fine game. It does have a lot of flaws, but for what it was trying to do, with all the different abilities and the large inventory system, is pretty cool.
The cutscenes are obviously very dated, but not horrible. The art for each spell and item and the dialogue, there's obviously a lot of love and work that was put into making this world and the characters. The story is fine and it's told pretty well. This is a game that deserves a remake, a rebuilt from the ground up remake. Bring back some of the old voice actors. One would be a problem, sadly.
And no, I do not want that remake idea of Dead Sun. I did not like the story idea that they were going with that. So what happens from here? Well, we all kind of know the story. Silicon Knights did come up with the idea of Blood Omen, but Crystal Dynamics owned it, and well, so they took it in a very different direction with another sequel. Stay tuned for that one next time. See ya.